Today we start a new series. This series is it's going to be a little different than what we've been doing over the last 10 weeks. And the last 10 weeks, we've made sure that we hung out beside the water. Over and over again, week after week, we looked into what would it look like for us to hang out beside the water inside of the Bible. And so for the last 10 weeks, we picked stories that happen on the Sea of Galilee or by a pool or by a lake or what have you. And so that's kind of where we've been all summer. Well, summer, in case you missed it, is over. Summer's done. I know it doesn't feel like it right now in here, which it still feels like it's like it because it is the middle of summer. And we're all working on that, by the way. If any of you have massive heating, air conditioning units that can be mobile, holler at me after we're done because we need one for in here. Maybe we'll have one next week. So that's what's happening, though. So summer is finished on that end, and so we're jumping into a new series for the next 4 weeks that's simply stated as values. And so what our values here at Foundation are pretty simple. We're going to go one by one over the next 4 weeks. And while it might not sound incredibly exciting at the outset, this makes us who we are. And so if you are someone that's gotten connected to our church and you've kind of been a part of what Foundation has been doing in the community or even here on Sunday mornings, then this is the DNA of why we do things the way we do things. And we wanted to make sure that we started with one that we keep at the forefront of who we are on a consistent basis, and that's this: healthy families. Healthy families is where it starts for us. Now, I'll tell you this. Healthy families don't look like what we would typically find a healthy family to look like. You know, if you were to rewind time a little bit and go back into, maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago, the family structure would look much different than it does today. And we would kind of take a look at that and we'd say, oh, that must be what we're shooting for. That's what we want to get to. That's what a healthy family looks like. Well, it's impossible for us to go back 50 or 60 years and create that again and kind of identify that as this is the incredible healthy family. A husband and a wife and 2 kids and 3.6 dogs and a picket fence. Like that, just not doable. And it's not doable because of the things that we've done in our country and amongst our relationships. They can't be undone, right? I mean, there have been multiple marriages and divorces. There's been adoptions, and there's been people that have abandoned kids, all those things. We can't get back and identify and say, you know what, if you've been in one of those circumstances where your husband's left you or your wife's left you or who knows, or your parents have abandoned you and they left you for adoption, whatever it is, we can't tell everybody that you have no chance of a healthy family because you can never get back to this husband, wife, 2 kids, white picket fence. And I think it's better this way. I think it's better this way because it teaches us that not everyone has to be just like us to be a part of who we are. People are different. And those differences ought to bring us together and teach us something about our country, our community, or the people around us, more than it does turn us off. I'll give you a few statistics. Right now in the United States, there's 82.83 million family units. Right? 82.83 million family units. Of those families, 15.5 million families are led by a single mom. Right? 6.4 million of those families are led by a single dad. The chances of us reconciling all of those relationships, some of them can't even be undone, right? Death has caused a separation. Their husband or wife's in jail for who knows how long. Some of those can't be put back together. So the question becomes, do they give up? I'm a product of adoption. Should I have given up? Should I have just mailed it in and said, you know what, I can never get back to the way that it happened in the beginning, where God actually put me into life. I can't get back there, so I'm just done for. I don't think that's the message that we find inside of the Bible. In fact, it's not even just I don't think, I am absolutely positive that that's not the message that we find inside of the Bible. There is this book, it's in the Old Testament. When we talk about the Bible, we typically talk about it in 2 different sections. There's an Old Testament and a New Testament. The Old Testament, it talks about the things that led up to Jesus being born here on the earth and living his life. So that's kind of what the Old Testament is. New Testament is everything that happened after Jesus arrived. And so this particular part of the Bible occurs in the Old Testament before Jesus has shown up. It's a book that's kind of linked to another book. This book we're going to be looking at today is called Ruth. But the book of Ruth is actually tied to another book called the book of Judges. And Judges is a book that kind of talks about the people of God and in a period of time where they found leadership in very unsuspecting places. These weren't kings or presidents or prime ministers. These were people that kind of led in ways that would typically not be, you would not find someone leading a nation. And I find it interesting that the book of Ruth happens in the time period of the book of Judges. But I find it interesting that the book of Judges gives us a little bit of context, and we need to make sure that we understand what the context is. And so we're going to begin with the very last verse of the book of Judges. And Judges 21, verse 25, it says this. In those days, Israel's the people of God, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Does that sound familiar? Does that resonate with you at all? The people of God say out loud, we have no king, and everyone just does as they please. That's the setting for our story today. Maybe this book of Ruth can give us a little bit of understanding of what God expects from a healthy family. Because the family we're going to look at today, it looks nothing like what we would categorize as a healthy family. In fact, we could probably make joke after joke when you hear who it involves about that's just absurd. I can't believe those two actually had a relationship with one another. I'll just go ahead and get into it. There's a lady named Naomi. You might say, whoa, I thought the book was called Ruth, but you're talking about a lady named Naomi. Well, Naomi is how it starts. There's a lady named Naomi. Naomi has a husband and 2 sons. And so she actually does kind of look like a typical family, right? That we would have thought about 70 years ago. Husband, wife, 2 boys, strapping young boys. They get married. Evidently, they were good looking. So they got married, and they have these wives. And so now this family of 2 has become a family of 4. Now it's a family of 6. And man, it's just a strong, here it comes kind of family. Well, the husband passes away. The sons pass away. And so they've gone. They're dead. They're done. And now it's just a mother, right? And her 2 daughter-in-laws. Hashtag for the win, right? That's what's left. They're not even in their home country anymore. They made a journey. They were from the town of Bethlehem. Bethlehem might seem familiar to you because this is where Jesus is from, right? Jesus is born in Bethlehem. They were in Bethlehem. There was this big famine. They actually went to another country where they would be considered foreigners. That's where her 2 boys found their wives. And so their wives are actually from another nation, right? Naomi would have been the immigrant in their country. And so she went over there, and her boys met wives, and then her boys died. And so things have gotten a little bit better back home. So she decides to go back home because the famine is over. She wants to go back where maybe there's some people that remember her or know her and those kind of things, because she has nothing in this land where she's a foreigner. There's nothing for her there. She can't figure it out. In this particular day and age, when a woman loses her husband, it's a big deal. But it's not as big a deal if they've got a son. Because if the son is there, they can still take care of the mom. They can make sure she's provided for. Women couldn't own property. They couldn't even perform transactions in the public forum. Like you couldn't buy and sell anything. You couldn't own anything. And so women were just in a place where it's like, if I don't have a guy to guide me through life, life comes to an end fairly quickly. And so not only did her husband pass away, so did her 2 sons, and they didn't have children either. So there's no boys, there's nothing to, so she decides, I'm going to go home. And maybe there I can beg, and maybe people will remember me there, and they'll be nice enough to give me some of their scraps. And so she sets off. The 2 daughter-in-laws are kind of following, and finally she turns around to them and she says, look, girls, here's the deal. Look, I'm becoming an old lady. There's no chance I'm getting married again. No chance. And so I have no way to provide for you, for either of you. And let's be honest, you're going to be foreigners in a land that people don't look like you, they don't talk like you, they believe in a God that you don't believe in, that you haven't followed your entire life. I'm setting you up for failure if you follow me back home. You need to stay. You need to go. You're still young. You don't have kids. You can go and find new husbands. Like, you will have this great life. Don't worry about me. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to go to my place of home, and I'm going to beg. So one of the daughter-in-laws, her name's Orpha. How about that? And she says, okay, cool, bounces. She's just gone. She's like, I appreciate that. That was good, because this was going to get awkward if I had to hang out a little bit longer. However, there's another daughter-in-law named Ruth. Maybe you're picking up why the book is named after her. And Ruth says, no. In fact, I'm just going to read it for you. I've kind of been paraphrasing. I don't know if you could tell that I was paraphrasing the story. But I'm going to read to you because this is probably one of the greatest commitments to a healthy family you'll find in the Bible. It says this in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16 and 17. It says, but Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I'll be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. Suddenly, Ruth jumps into the story where Naomi is trying to do the right thing. She's releasing these young girls back and saying, you know what, go make a life for yourself. She's kind of falling on the sword, so to speak. She's falling on her own sword, saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to just give myself, you go. And Ruth says, no, there's something bigger that bonds us together than just having a life that's worth living from a monetary or materialistic standpoint. Ruth had made a decision that even if our life will be short together, that would be better to honor the family unit than for me to go and make this incredible life. There was some kind of relationship there. Remember that Ruth is a foreigner in terms of Jehovah God, in terms of the God we worship, the God that Naomi was worshiping, the God that Naomi's husband and her two sons worship, the God that's there out of Bethlehem, the God that people there in Bethlehem are worshiping. And so they're coming back to a place, there must have been some connection that when Ruth kind of got in relationship with Naomi, she said, you know what, there's something special about the way she treats me. There's something interesting about the way she interacts with me. And it's so special, there was something about that relationship that made her say, you know what, I'm willing to give up my entire life just to stay connected to you. If you're wondering just how much of an influence a healthy family can have, this begins to paint a decent picture. When they get back to Bethlehem, it's just as Naomi said. There's nothing for them. They can't do anything. In fact, her husband has land that she can't even own, right? Her husband has land in Bethlehem that belongs to the family, but because there's no male, she can't even claim it. She can't put a house on it. She can't do anything with it. She can't sell it to make money to be able to buy food. She can't do anything. It doesn't belong to her. Well, Ruth says, you know what? I'm younger, and so I'm going to go and try to do something about it. And so I'm going to go to work in the fields, and I'm going to glean from the people that are harvesting. And so gleaning was just, hey, after the harvesters went through, the things that they didn't get on their first pass would still be on the ground. And so poor people would come through and they would grab up what the harvesters left behind. That would be called gleaning. And they would take it all together, and that's how they would eat. In fact, for the people of Israel, you weren't allowed to go back through a second time. You went through the first time. Whatever you left, you had to leave it for the poor. And so that's what Ruth is out doing. She's out doing it in a guy's field named Boaz. And Boaz sees her, and he sees that she's a foreigner, and so he asks about her to someone else. He says, oh, well, this foreigner. She came back with Naomi. Naomi's back in town. Not sure if you heard it or not, but she's back. Guess who's back? Back again. And so she's back, right? And this girl came with her. And he was like, okay, that's neat. And so he makes some special arrangements because of her commitment to Naomi. He sees that she doesn't have to be here. He sees that she doesn't have to stay connected to Naomi. But because of her effort, he says, you know what? Let's make some special arrangements for her. In fact, he puts her at the front of the line to get the best of the gleanings. He even gives her access to the water that his own people that work for him would gather out of the well. She said, you can come and get water anytime you want. Boaz is starting to do the right thing. He goes back Ruth goes back to Naomi, and she's got all this food. Like, this has been a good day. And she's like, where did this come from? And I went to Boaz, and Boaz, his field, he made all these arrangements for me. He was great. And Naomi actually says, hey, Boaz is our kinsman redeemer. To which Ruth is a foreigner, so I'm sure she was like, what? He's a who? A kinsman redeemer for the people of Israel, there were a few rules. It was the closest male family member in your life when all of the immediate family that were males passed away or died or something happened to them, they were left or they died in war, whatever it was. And there were rules for kinsman redeemers. This is the way that God set up his people to take care of one another. It said this, the covenant rules for a kinsman redeemer were this, that they were to redeem the land. In other words, the property that Naomi couldn't have, that kinsman redeemer would redeem it on her behalf, that they would redeem someone who had been enslaved, that they would redeem or provide an heir, which that gets really tricky, right? And so since there's a male missing in terms of how lineage happens, if there was a kinsman redeemer, the kinsman redeemer would step in and make a baby. Hopefully most of you know how to do that. And they would talk about healthy families. And hopefully that would provide an heir. And that was part of his responsibilities. He would avenge a death. The kinsman redeemer was responsible for that. The kinsman redeemer is responsible for being a trustee for that particular family. And those were the responsibilities. Now, I find it interesting that when Naomi got back, Naomi didn't walk right up to Boaz and just say, hey, you're my kinsman redeemer, so you've got some work to do, right? She didn't do that. In fact, she didn't even arrange this whole thing. It just so happened that Boaz reached out. Now, maybe Boaz knew something that we don't find inside of the Bible in the story. Maybe he was aware. We find out a little bit that he is slightly aware of a few things, because after this has kind of gone on, Naomi does tell Ruth, hey, you know what? This evening, when Boaz is on the threshing floor, he's going to be preparing what has happened in the harvest. When he's preparing that, I want you to go and present yourself to him and say, hey, you can have me. As our kinsman redeemer, I'm yours. Tell me what to do. And so she does that evening, and Boaz actually responds, and he says, I'm willing to be your kinsman redeemer, but there is one other man in our village that actually is closer to Naomi than I am, and I first have to ask his permission. And so he goes before the city council the next day, and he makes that request. He says, hey, is there anyone here that's going to, and he already knows this in his head, is there anyone here that's going to be the kinsman redeemer for Naomi? And so the guy, he steps up, he says, actually, that's my job, and I'll take the land, I'll take Naomi, and he says, well, actually, there's more to it. There's a girl named Ruth. She's a foreigner, and she comes with Naomi, and immediately the guy backs out. He's like, well, then I'm not interested. If it's a package deal, no, can't do it. To which Boaz says, great, I want to. And so Boaz goes and he arranges for them to be taken care of. In fact, they go on to have a son. And that son produces another son. And that lineage continues. All because of a mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, being a healthy family. Not what you would typically expect. Not the picture that we would paint on our own. Not the things that we would say, this is what healthy families look like. In fact, probably the exact opposite of a relationship we thought would be locked together forever. Here they are, a healthy family. I would say if there's anything for us to learn from this, and I'll be quick with this, there's just a few things I want to make sure that we point out as we look at the Bible. We ask, so what does this mean for us? The first one is this, that healthy families go all in for one another. Healthy families go all in for one another. Now that's huge. And that's a big thing because life gets busy and life gets complicated, and then life has all of the things that emotionally tear us one place or the other, and they split us in 2 or in 4 and 6 or whoever knows, and there becomes these little things at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner and any other dinner you get to, and they didn't show up because of this, and all those things start to happen. And life is real, life is complicated. But at the end of the day, the truth is that healthy families go all in together. It's difficult to say, where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. That's a difficult thing for us to come to in our relationships. But we look at Ruth and we see that she was all in. That she was the catalyst for this healthy family. Notice Naomi wasn't all in at the beginning. She was all in her own way. She was like, you know what? Get out so you can go and have a great thing. I'm doing the best I think for you. But it was the effort of Ruth. I said, no, I'm not going to play that. I'm not going to get into that. God put me here. There's something about you and your faith that attracts me to you. I'm all in with you. Boaz was all in. He didn't have to do any of those things. In fact, honestly, he probably could have guilted the guy into taking Naomi. Or honestly, they probably could have gotten rid of Ruth because technically she was a foreigner and she didn't belong. That's the way they would have worked it. This could have gone a number of ways. But what Boaz said, you know what? I want to be all in on this family. Being all in requires lots of sacrifice. It requires putting aside what we do that advances us in our career and as people. It requires us putting those things to aside so that we can kind of focus on the people that need us most. If you were here a couple of weeks ago, we specifically talked about that idea that Jesus has this ability to understand, even in a crowd, who needs me most. Remember the woman that reached out and touched the edge of his garment and she was healed after she had been bleeding for 12 years? That Jesus was in the midst of this chaos and still came to the conclusion, I know who needs me most. Do we have that ability to look into our own family and ask that question, who needs me the most? And how do I go all in on that? Those are difficult questions for us to wrestle with. The other thing I want to make sure that we picked up, and we didn't spend a ton of time on it, but the fact of the harvest. We talked about how that's kind of how the relationship started between Boaz and Ruth. And the people would leave something on the ground and they would go after them and they would kind of gather up what was left behind. They would glean from the fields. There was an act of generosity there. Ultimately, what we find is the harvest is definitely one of the biggest things that happens in Jewish culture at this time. The harvest is the result of God's blessing. The harvest is how you provide for your family. The harvest sets you up for the coming year. The harvest is proof to everyone around you of the work that you put in your own fields. The harvest is the result of everything and all the effort and all the people that work for you and all of your family. Everything comes out of the harvest. The harvest is proof of blessing. The harvest is your provision. But the harvest is also the greatest opportunity to show generosity. And for the folks that were following Jesus, following God at that time, they were the people of God. They recognized that not only was it a place of provision, but it was a place to give. The harvest is just as much about giving as it is receiving. That was a big deal for them. I mean, that was huge for them because they knew one pass and what we leave belongs to people that put no work in. It belongs to the community around us that did nothing except for sit on the street and beg. That God had allotted for them, people that couldn't provide for themselves, people that were abandoned, people that were had issues or handicaps where they couldn't get out in the field and work, right? Where God provided for them, and He provided for them through the generosity of His people. And so people that followed God, they knew when it was harvest time, it was giving time. And I think that's something that for all of us, we have the opportunity to ask the same question. I was so pumped last week to announce that we had made it through our first 7 months as a church, and we had met budget every single month. Yeah, that's something to celebrate. That's not a good celebration, but I mean, you got a lot of work to do. But that's an incredible place to be. And there are people in this room that give all over the place, right? Because each person's harvest is different. What God gives you is to say, hey, this is how I provide and this is how I bless you is different. And so if you were to take a look at how offering gets put in, it's so different across the board. But I'll tell you, there's a consistent theme in all of it. And every single person that supports what God is doing in our community through Foundation, every single person, is that it came from what God gave you. And it's coming to that conclusion where you say, you know what? My harvest is just as much about giving as it is receiving. And because of it, because of that generosity, this summer there were hundreds and hundreds of kids that participated in basketball camp, art and science camp, the bookmobile, ice cream truck events, Foundation Kids, Ruth Hill Outreach, our food and lunch program that we jumped in with Bridging the Gap on a couple of weeks this summer. That is a result of people of God recognizing that when God gives, we give. I want our church to be known for that. I want to continue walking forward and showing our community what kind of difference we make. In about 4 weeks, there will be 438 kids at Ruth Hill that receive school shoes. Tennis shoes from Nike and Adidas and Under Armour that have partnered with us for the Shoe Project in 2018. And there are some kids there that don't need new shoes. In fact, we already had 2 or 3 families that said, hey, we're one of the families that we don't need new shoes. We're good. What do we do with them? And so those shoes will make their way to Bridging the Gap. Those kids will receive them because it's an in-kind gift to us. And then I've told their families, you should make an appointment to go over and see Bridging the Gap, and they can deliver the shoes there. About 80% of the kids at Ruth Hill are on free and reduced lunch, which just means there's a large number of kids that live in and around the poverty line. And we have made a commitment as a church to have a high-impact relationship at Ruth Hill Elementary School. It's the little place that we've circled and said, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we have the greatest impact there that we possibly could as a church, period. And that involves teacher care and kid care. But even still, our ability to be generous, even to some kids who probably don't need it, they will then turn around and get to learn that act of generosity. I say, this was given to me, and now I'm going to go give it to somebody that could use it more than I could. That's what we chase when we chase generosity. That's why we allow people to glean from what we have, because when God gives us, we know that even what he gives us, we don't need every single piece. For our own purposes, there are purposes that are out there that we're not aware of, and we want people to be able to come to Foundation and to glean from what we have, because we're an open-handed church. We're a church that focuses on the needs of our community. This will never be our destination. This will always be our launching point. If you want to be a part of what we're doing at Foundation and you think that it's being here on Sunday mornings because, I don't know, you really love the fog machine and it's your favorite thing in the world, like if that's your deal, there's probably a better church for you. We do what we do on Sunday mornings because out there matters more. This is a starting point. It's not our finishing point. And it will always be that. Our community will always be our destination, not church on Sunday mornings. I have to ask the question, do you know what the result of a healthy family is? Do you know what the result is? There's a really incredible moment here in the Bible. I want to read it to you. If you stumble upon it, it's so far away from the book of Ruth that maybe you can kind of forget what's happening. But I want to tell you what the result of going all in can be. I want to tell you the result of concentrating and giving everything to create a healthy family can be. I'll read it to you. It's in Matthew chapter 1. It's in verse 5. It says this: Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of King David. if I were to read the rest of this, it's the lineage of Jesus. Jesus' name is in there. If we go all the way down to verse 16, I won't give you all the names. But it says, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Mary was the mother of Jesus, who's called the Messiah. Ruth, a daughter-in-law, a foreigner, who grew up not even knowing who God was. Ends up giving birth to a guy who's the grandfather of King David. And eventually gives birth to Jesus. That can be the result of a healthy family. Healthy families lead to Jesus. I don't care what your family looks like. If it's a grandmother and a granddaughter and grandson, and that's the family, a healthy family can lead to Jesus. If it's a single mom, 6 kids, no family's close, a healthy family can lead to Jesus. If it's a husband and a wife, 2 kids, a chihuahua, a healthy family can lead to Jesus. If it's just you and you're all by yourself in your home at night, a healthy family can lead to Jesus. If you're raised in foster care, a healthy family can lead to Jesus. If you're adopted, a healthy family can lead to Jesus. If you've been forgotten, a healthy family can lead to Jesus. Our church values healthy families. We don't value families being healthy when they arrive. We value the process of partnering with you to create healthy families. Healthy families for us falls into 3 categories: healthy marriage, healthy parents, healthy children. And at some point, every single person is connected to people in that mode. How do we do it? We lead to Jesus. That's where we begin. We lead to Jesus.